to scatterplot tutorial number 1. Today we're going to walk through how to create a scatterplot using Excel. So you can see I have a small data table over here. This is a completely made up data set, but we are just going to use it for practice today. So how to initially start to create my scatterplot, I'm going to highlight all of my data. So I'm just going to click on year and in one motion highlight all of my numbers. Once my data is highlighted, I'm going to go to the upper left corner on Insert, click on that tab. I'm going to go over to this recommended charts section. The recommended chart I'm going to use is just this this plot with some random dots on it. This is our scatter plot. I get some other options to pop up, and I'm going to choose this very first option with only the dots. I don't want any lines connecting it. Once I get that, you can see I have my chart pop up on my screen. Now it has some data points, some numbers down here, and some numbers on the side here. But I don't really know what those numbers are referring to. So to make sure I know exactly what this data point is telling me, I'm going to double check my numbers. So this first point is all the way at 2000s and a little above 400. So I'm going to go over my data table and figure out what that corresponds to. So this 2000 and a little above 400 corresponds to this first year and number of adopted cats. So I know that this axis down here has to be my year, and this axis here, my Y, has to be number of adopted cats. Now, to get my axis correctly labeled, I need to add a chart element. So I can either go to this little plus button here, or I can go to the upper left corner for add chart elements. So I'm going to try it with going to add chart elements, scroll down to axis, titles, and then I'm going to add a primary horizontal or my x-axis title. When I do that, you can see a little box appears at the bottom of my screen. Now, I know this is years, so I'm going to add that as my axis label in years. Now, I still need to label my y-axis. So I'm going to go back up to that add chart element or this plus sign. So this time I'm going to try it with my plus sign. I'm going to click on this. I have axis titles checked, but if I go to this little drop down, this little arrow, I can see my primary vertical or my y-axis is not checked. So I'm going to check that, and I have an axis title box appear on my screen next to my y-axis. So again, I know this has to be my number of adopted cats based on this data point here. So I'm going to put that as my axis label, number of adopted cats. Now my chart is looking pretty good. The other thing that I would like to change is this title. It's the same exact title or label as my y-axis. So I need it to be a little more descriptive about what my graph is. So instead of number of adopted cats, I'm going to talk a little bit about my variables and that this graph is showing some sort of relationship. So I'm just going to have my title be relationship between number of adopted cats and years. I'm going to make sure I have all my capitals and everything is spelled correctly. And there I have my title. Now your title can be anything as long as it's not X versus Y. You want it to be just a little bit more descriptive than that. One other thing I can change is I want to make sure my data points are nice and centered. Now this graph does a pretty good job of doing that, but in the future you might not have as good of centered data. So I'm going to walk through how to adjust this axis. So So I'm going to look at just my y-axis, how to adjust my y-axis. If I'm on my graph, I can right click right over my y-axis. I can see I have a little pop-up box that says vertical value axis. So I'm going to right click on that. Now I get a lot of options, but I remember I want to change my axis spread. So I want to change my axis or format my axis. When I click on that, I get a box over here to the right that shows my axis options. So I have a minimum and a maximum bound. And for this graph, I'm just going to change our minimum. I'm going to try to put it at 400. And then I hit enter. And you can see it adjusts my axes, so my graph is just a little bit more centered and my data looks a little bit more clear. And that is how you create a scatter plot using Microsoft Excel.